So let's move on to the ongoings in the world of think tankery. Driving into work today, over the radio, you hear a little news update talking about how the May jobs report came in, right? Everyone, all the economists look for these types of numbers that come out every month about the jobs, unemployment rates.
Pretty bad.
Yada, yada, yada. Right. So, explain this to me. The May jobs report came in with some pretty bad numbers. Economists were hoping for an increase of, I heard, 170,000, maybe 200,000 jobs increase. The report showed an increase of 38,000. 38. So.
Of which I believe a third of that were government jobs.
Oh, hey, how about that?
Only, I think, 28,000 of those were actually private sector jobs, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Unfortunately, it takes an increase of like 100,000 to 140,000 to stay up with population growth.
Yeah.
So this is, for all intents and purposes, a decline, right? It's bad news. So with this bad number, the unemployment rate still dropped. It dropped to 4.7%. So, how do these numbers jive, John?
Well, so, and I think we're going to go into some of this. Obviously, the report we're going to talk about gets into a lot of this.
Right.
The major thing is their unemployment rate is people actively looking for a job.
Right.
Which makes sense because, okay, you wouldn't necessarily include retirees in the unemployment rate because they're not looking for jobs, so that makes sense. You're not looking at people who, in high school or college, like they're not looking for jobs, obviously, most likely, or at least not to, kind of remain. So when you're in a decent economy where all things are kind of static, it can make sense, so you can kind of track how that's going. But what we've seen since the recession, and I mean, you're kind of almost falling back into one, is people are literally just leaving the workforce.
Right.
So they're not actively looking for a job anymore, but they need a job.
Right, yeah.
That's the simplest way to put it is like, yeah, these people aren't looking for a job because they basically raised their hands and said, I can't find a job. Right. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, right? I mean, it could be, well, I can just stay on welfare, so I don't need to look for a job. I mean, there's a lot of background on why people wouldn't be looking for a job, but that's problematic when you have less people
or they just
in the job market.
Turn to the black market, get their income that way.
Yeah, I don't know how much percent, I don't know how big that is, but
but
probably not making up for the, more than 38,000 jobs, probably not covering that. But.
You're right, though. It is the workforce, or the labor participation rate, I believe is the correct term for it. So the May numbers also showed about 500,000 people dropped out of the labor market. So the labor force participation rate is down to 62.6%, which is near a 4-decade low.
I was going to ask, wow, that's...
Yeah, a 4-decade low. So that's how you get...
It's all those millennials, man. They're just sitting on the couch.
I know.
Their parents' basement.
Right.
They don't need no job. They're playing Xbox and eating Cheetos.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm a millennial, technically, so I can make fun of it.
Yeah, me too. So, so this kind of raises some kind of confusion because the Federal Reserve has been using, or has basically said multiple times, that they are using the unemployment rate as an indicator of economic growth when deciding whether or not to raise the interest rates. Right. So, what do they do now? They've got a lowering unemployment rate, but the jobs numbers over the past 4 months have been really declining. So, what do? So this was an article, I guess you can call it a policy brief, that I found from
looks brief.
Right.
We'll call it that.
We'll call it that. The Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, which you can imagine is a think tank based out of Rhode Island that supports free market ideas. So this policy brief is titled The Jobs and Opportunity Index, Tracing Rhode Island's Economic Progress. So they basically, the first segment of this explains what, me and John were just talking about, how the unemployment rate can be really misleading. and how they propose using the JOI, or the Jobs and Opportunity Index. So, thoughts before I get into how you measure this?
Well, I agree with the unemployment rate not being maybe as good of an indicator as it used to be. I think at some point it was a pretty good indicator.
Well, I think it could be a good indicator over, if you average it out over longer terms.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're looking at it month to month like this, I don't think so.
And I'm actually not trying to make fun of what the Rhode Island Freedom and Prosperity group puts out here, but this Jobs and Opportunity Index, which is kind of their counter.
Right.
This is such a nerd thing let's make this as complicated as possible, which is this really long math problem of 0.35 35% towards this. It's just basically a long math problem
multiplied by that,
right? And it probably is more accurate. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be better, but I almost equate this to you're not a big college football fan,
no,
but we had the BCS, we've had all these things. We have RPI for basketball. They have all these metrics that they try to. They're well, this one's not working because these people they don't know what they're talking about. And then we have poll. We're just gonna give every coach a vote, and that's gonna figure it out. And they're well, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna come up with this crazy math formula like the BCS, and that's gonna figure it out. It's for everything, whether it's economics or college football.
Yeah, no, I think you're
right.
There's
not a perfect model, right? There's no,
of course not.
One math problem or equation or metric that really is going to encompass. I think it's let's get as close as we can and hope. So the unemployment rate was probably a good one, and I still think that's probably a good data point.
Sure.
But you do need some of these other ones. So this Jobs and Opportunity Index does kind of bring in some of those things.
Well, let's consider it the sabermetrics, right? Yeah. The sabermetrics of economic indicators.
Yeah. So they have. So you have this. I don't want to get too far into this. But basically, they have the labor force times the people employed divided by basically welfare recipients in the state.
Right.
So, they're taking a lot of different data points, whether it's how many people are on welfare, even taxes, in-state jobs, people unemployed, people underemployed, which is always something that people say. It's well, people have jobs, but maybe they're only only a part-time job, but they need a full-time job.
To simplify all
that's what I'm saying. This gets really
I know.
wonky.
To simplify it, they basically come up with 3 primary factors. And it gets into depth on how they determine these factors, but it's the job outlook factor, which is a measure of optimism as to the work opportunities in the current market. Okay. So like John was kind of describing, that is multiple factors taken into account to determine that factor. Plus the freedom factor, which is a measure of self-sufficiency as related to the vibrancy of the state's free market economy, multiplied by the prosperity factor, which is a measure of financial motivation as to how much income people can expect to keep after paying taxes. So, like I was saying, all of those have their little detailed how you come up with it. But when all the math is done and you hit enter on your calculating device, it generates a rate that is probably more telling. Actually, I would guarantee that it's more telling than the unemployment rate. So one of the things that I found here from their website was kind of showing a side-by-side of the unemployment rate over the past, looks like about 10 years, compared to this JOI index, or I guess index is the I of JOI, so whatever. Unemployment compared to JOI. So when you look at it, the unemployment rate from 2007 is, that's when it starts to go up. You have our crisis, yada yada. And then after about 2010, it really starts to trend down and almost gets back to that 2007 level by 2016.
Okay.
Right?
That's for unemployment?
That's the unemployment rate. So the JOI numbers, they show basically a dip leading into 2007. So it was almost kind of telling. Like it was almost kind of
so it could be a
foreshadowing, right? A little bit. And then it really starts going down after 2007 and then basically plateaus around 2013. And now it's just starting to inch up again. So it kind of, it does a little better of a job. I don't think anybody, it says in here that, many Rhode Islanders don't feel like their family finances have improved over the recent years, and they are just now starting to anticipate it getting a little better. So I think that this little side-by-side chart of the two numbers, I think that's the most revealing of it.
It would be interesting to see, and I doubt they would do this, but maybe they would, seeing how this would work for other states.
Well, they do have...
Have they done this for any other states?
They have, no. Well, maybe. I don't know.
They're obviously based in Rhode Island, so it wouldn't make very much sense, but I guess you could apply this to...
They have Rhode Island compared to New England as a whole, and then the United States as a whole.
How does the United States look?
All the lines kind of mimic each other. Okay. The United... Well, I printed this out in black and white.
That's helpful.
Right. So you could see that... I think the national number is probably a little bit lower than the state ones, but state and regional ones.
It is interesting that the two of the kind of criteria are the freedom and prosperity factors.
Oh, and that's in their name.
Yeah, Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. That's some good branding right there.
We are onto you guys. We are onto you.
Yeah, and they get Mike Stenhouse, who actually runs that foundation. He used to play for the Boston Red Sox. I don't know if you knew his pitcher.
We're coming for you as well, baseball wise.
Oh yeah, they do.
Another factoid. Yeah, John's just full of factoids
I
today.
am full of useless information.
Right.
But they do a good job out there. Hey, even in states like Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all these states that you think there's no hope. California, Illinois, for God's sakes.
I know.
There are groups that are fighting the good fight, thinking outside the box, which I think this is really good. This is good think tank stuff.
Right. No, this is great.
Because they're like, you know what? We keep saying unemployment rate, that doesn't mean anything.
No.
And we all kind of inherently say, yeah, I get it, but then what are we going to use, right? And that's always the argument. Well, the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity said, well, this is one other way to do it. It might not be the best way. I'm sure they'd admit, hey, this isn't perfect. But it looks like it's at least as good, if not better, than what we're using with unemployment.
I would argue that it's much better.
So check out your think tank in your state, even if you're in a very statist state, and check them out.